Hello lovely people, and welcome to the second instalment of Book Chat.
Sophie Vlogs.
Book Chat is a semi-regular but not like strictly scheduled little time for me to chat to you about a couple of things that I've read recently. Maybe I don't have enough thoughts on them for their own videos, so I'm just gonna do every now and then a little bulk book chat. It's more cash than like a monthly roundup, less scheduled than a monthly roundup, but essentially a monthly roundup. Diving right in, the first book I want to talk about is one that I read on my Kindle, and that is The Sorceress House by Gene Wolfe. The Sorceress House is the first Gene Wolfe book that I've ever read. The reason I read it is because I do a podcast with my friend, and he's been listening to a podcast called Alzabo Soup, who talk about Gene Wolfe, and they specifically said that The Sorceress House is a really good start point if you're interested in checking out any of Gene Wolfe's work. So my friend is really enjoying this podcast. I didn't want to listen to the podcast until I'd read any of his work because obviously spoilers, so I thought I would use that little convenient jumping on point that they mentioned and have a go. I enjoyed it. Gene Wolfe is such a big name, it was really fun to actually read something of his. The book is about this guy who's just come out of prison, so he has like nothing essentially, and he finds this really dilapidated old house and thinks to himself like, oh, you know, if I could convince the people who own this to let me fix it up, and then maybe I could like, you know, live in it at the time of doing it. Essentially, like, his main priority is get a roof over his head, be able to afford to live. And then it turns out that the person who owns the house just like signs it over to him, and all of these mysterious things keep happening, and so essentially there's this big mystery around the house, and I'll leave it there because a lot of stuff happens. So it's one of those books that I feel like I was reading it, and as I was reading it, I was trying to hold on to all the new information that was coming in because I was trying to figure out what was going on. So that was really fun. I'd be really interested to read more of Wolfe's work because I feel like it is that sort of thing where you work as a reader to figure out what's going on, and I also think I'm probably going to reread this book because we might do a podcast episode on it. So I'm going to reread it, and with the knowledge of how it ends, I then want to go back through and see if I pick up on more stuff, see if more things become clear to me. That whole thing. It's one of those books which I feel like returning to will bring you more, and I really like that. I think that's really great when you sort of create like a dialogue with the book. So that was really good. I enjoyed it. Another thing that I read because of a recommendation from Mark is the Captain Midnight series. This is a comic book series that was written by Joshua Williamson and illustrated by a bunch of different people. Essentially, Captain Midnight was a comic from a while ago, and he was, similarly to Captain America, he's that sort of superhero who helps fight Nazis in the war, has his own little team, that sort of thing. And then in this series, it's he goes missing during World War II. They don't really know what's happened to him. What actually happens is he reappears, but in our contemporary time. And so there's a lot of stuff about, number one, like, how did that even happen? And also the daughter of his main nemesis, who was a big head Nazi honcho type guy who died, that person's daughter has also managed to come through to our time and has sort of made herself like a figure in like the public eye and that sort of thing, and is presumably up to no good. So there's all this stuff about like, how did the time travel actually happen? The fact that there is a literal Nazi has become like a technological name in our contemporary world, and how do you fight that? There's a whole load of different arcs that run throughout it. Personally, I really enjoyed sort of the first storyline arc. I thought that was really well done. There was a moment which genuinely I did not see coming, and I thought that was brilliant. As the series went on, I probably didn't enjoy it as much towards the end. Just where the storyline ended up wasn't as sort of compelling to me. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. But I definitely think sort of the first half of it was better than the second half of it to my reading. Moving on from that, we have The Last Dragonslayer by Jasper Fforde. This is the third Jasper Fforde book I've read. I previously read The Air Affair, which I really loved. It's sort of when you can go into books and like literary figures are people and all this sort of stuff. That was really good. And I also read, I think it's called The Great Over Easy, which is sort of a mystery book all about the murder of Humpty Dumpty. Again, really loved that. This one I didn't enjoy as much as those two. I think maybe because there was less of a strong, like, literary reference theme going through it. I don't know, I just felt like those two were a little bit more inspired, in my opinion. It's about this world where magic exists, but it's heavily regulated by the government. There are also dragons that exist, but they sort of have an agreement where they stick to their own territories. And as the name would suggest, there is one last dragon, and our main character sort of inherits the title of Dragonslayer, and the whole world is expecting her to slay this dragon, and she doesn't really want to slay this dragon. And there's a whole lot of like complex politicalness that comes with that, and also like, is there the relationship between dragons and magic, and all of this stuff. So it was fun, it was a good read, it was a very easy read. It maybe wasn't as good as the other Jasper Ffordes I've read, but I'll probably continue reading the series because someone's lent it to me, so I have the full series to read. So I'm definitely going to keep with it to see if it develops a bit further, because I'm interested where they will go from the end point of this novel. So if you're already a fan of Jasper Fforde, I'd recommend it. If you haven't read any of him but would be interested to, I'd suggest starting maybe with The Air Affair. Moving on, we have Monsters of Men by Patrick Ness, which is the third book in the Chaos Walking trilogy, and oh dear God, this trilogy just ruined me. I don't want to do a whole review based on this just because, like, it's the third book in a trilogy, it's been released for a while, most people have already read it, we're there. I have done a review of the first book, The Knife of Never Letting Go, which I will link below or something if you want to check that out and read it. Where this series started and where it ends up are completely different places, but that journey is so fantastic. This is, in my opinion, the prime example of how writing for a younger audience, a YA audience, that sort of thing, doesn't mean that you are not able to tackle heavy topics. This is so great. Like, I want all young people to just read this series because it has such an exploration of... Earlier on in the series, you have topics that are explored around, like, gender and thinking and stuff, and then by this point we've got this really complex dialogue about war and about, like, empathy, and I just... it was so intense, this journey. I read this whole book, well, I read most of this on a train journey to Sheffield and back, and then I had to, like, stop towards the end because I knew that there was probably something coming up that was going to make me weep, and I was just like, I cannot do this in public. So I waited till I got home, and then I, like, read it, and I just, like, cried alone on my own. This series is incredible. Patrick Ness, this is the first Patrick Ness stuff I've ever read, and I now just supremely rate him. He is a master, and I need to read more of his stuff and finish watching Class, because he is the writer of that, any Doctor Who fan. I'm going to end on two pieces of sort of non-fiction. First up is Marzi, a memoir by Marzena Sauer, with art by Sylvain Savoa. I'm sorry if I said any of that wrong. This is sort of a graphic novel memoir of Marzi's life, because she grew up in Poland 10 years before the end of communism. So this was really interesting. It's sort of, I think, aimed at maybe a slightly younger reader, or I only say that because it's told from the perspective of a child. It is very simply written, and there is a childish aspect to it. That doesn't mean it's not accessible for older readers, but I can see how this would be a really great vehicle to give to younger readers to help them understand, you know, the concept of communism and what growing up in a different country is like in a certain different regime that is something that we've never experienced, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it did that really great thing where it balances just, like, the simple facts of childhood, like the games she plays, that sort of thing, the fact that she desperately just wants a Barbie doll. And then you have the moments which focus on the fact that her father was part of one of these massive strikes against communism and stuff. And so I think it walks that line really well. It's one that, whilst I might not be like, oh, this is my favourite thing I've ever read, I definitely am really glad that I read it, and I feel like it's made me like become more aware of something that I had no previous concept of. I'm also really sorry, I think a truck just drove past and that was loud. And finally we have Renoir My Father by Jean Renoir, which is about the painter Renoir, but written by his son, who was also, was he a playwright, a film writer, or something? He wrote stuff. I've been reading this book for I think maybe like 4 months or something now. It's a collection of essays by Renoir's son that essentially tell you about his life and his painting and stuff. So each chapter is like a little small essay, and you go from just like Renoir's childhood up to his death, and I think because it's written by his son, you get this really interesting insight, because people have written biographies of Renoir before. Obviously he's quite a famous figure in the art world, people write about you, but because you hear it from his son, you get a little bit more intimacy, you get a little bit more understanding of the inner workings of the mind. It's not just, this guy is a genius, he's a painter, let's all talk about how great a painter it is. It's like, this is how he likes to make his coffee, and this is what it was like towards the end of his life when he couldn't really move. And you get like this much more intimate knowledge of what he was like as a person, and a person who has contradictions. So he'll say one thing about art, but then he'll also say another thing about art, and maybe they don't work together, but that's just because he's a human. So, yeah, as a book, I read it mostly on public transport. I read it a lot on my way to work and back from work, because it means I can dip in, do a bit. I didn't just like sit down and just like read my way through it. I dipped in, I got little glimpses, because it is a lot of information, and I do, like, you know, it is like, this is how Renoir makes coffee, like, you know, you get a lot of info, so it's something good to dip in and out of, but really interesting. Glad I read it. That's it for this instalment of Book Chat. If you would like to continue the book chat in the comments below, please do, because that's my like hopeful aim, is that this will be like a conversation rather than just me being like, and then I read this, and then I read this, and then I read this. Like, I want to have a dialogue. So if you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts. If you're interested in them or have questions about them, do feel free to ask. Just if you want to chat about what you read since my last book chat, please do. Let's get a chat going. Let's get a book chat. Have we like really come to terms with the fact that I call this book chat and I'm just like going with it? The next installment of this will come whenever I've read enough books to feel like I'm justified in doing one. And until that point, I will see you next time I upload a video, and I hope everything is good with you and that you're reading some really super fab stuff. Have a lovely day.